Hello, I'm Helen Edward, and this is Conservative Policy Forum, CPF Voices. And I am delighted to be able to discuss, as part of our education and skills consultation recently, this topic of apprenticeships. And I'm here today with Cllr John Cope, who is not only the National Chair for CCA, the Conservative Councillors Association, but he's also been the executive director at UCAS, and his range of experience covers education policy and consulting to both universities, charities, and ed tech. And I first met John in the election in June 24, because John was standing in Esher and Walton and I stood next door.
Quite the bonding experience.
Yes, it was. And we were out on the doorstep a lot. And here we are today. And John is doing some fantastic things at the CCA, and I'm watching that with lots of admiration. But I'm so excited, actually, to hear his story on apprenticeships. I've been asking him to tell me all about this for ages. So here is my opportunity. And I'm going to start by asking John a little bit about his personal career and background and how that's brought him to the topic of apprenticeships and why he feels so strongly about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think apprenticeships is one of those things that we don't talk about enough. It's one of those amazing achievements when we were in government that we kind of just did.
Yes.
Achieve this amazing,
yes. It was absolutely at the heart, wasn't it, of our education achievement.
We delivered millions of apprenticeships and proper apprenticeships. We've always had apprenticeships in this country. And before the reform of the last government, lots of apprenticeships were, they were low quality. They had very little training in them, and they weren't really setting people up for their career. They were kind of basic low-paid jobs too often.
Yes.
And then we brought in all these changes. We made apprenticeships really genuinely prestigious. And I saw this, quite a few times in my career. The first time I saw it was when I was at the CBI. And what was really exciting about the CBI is that every day you're just meeting employers. And they would say things like, well, young people aren't work ready. We aren't getting the people we need. We've got these gaps here. And it's holding back our growth. It's holding back our productivity and things like that. And I just saw, when those changes that we implemented around apprenticeships came in, there was a little bit of, employers like, you're making us pay for this. This is a little bit of concern about that. But really what they saw was just this kind of almost magic bullet of actually when you bring together young people with employers, with proper training, you really set them up for life and you set them up for work. And I saw this again at UCAS, and I led on the integration of apprenticeships into UCAS, which is a really exciting kind of thing I'm so proud of. And what I saw there was not that snobbery that historically had held back apprenticeships for too many. Young people aren't snobs about them. We asked for the first time at UCAS to the million or so people that go through it each year, are you interested in doing an apprenticeship? And about 40% said yes. That's 400,000 young people, right? And adults who are open-minded to doing an apprenticeship and are taking it really seriously. That's not a snobby attitude of university as the only route to success. Actually, young people are really, really open-minded to it. And it's because, as the last government just spoke about apprenticeships more and more, and it became normal, it became part of careers advice and things like that. So there was this, what I would, call a kind of a cultural revolution where university, college, and also apprenticeships really, for the first time in a very long time, almost kind of became equals. And, as I say at the start, it was an amazing achievement. And now we're in opposition. What I think is so important is that we don't, forget about that achievement. We should keep on talking about it over and over again. But we now need to think about, well, that was great, but that was the past. How do we take it to the next step? How to get more apprenticeships out there, how to get into more occupations and things like that. And that's why the CPF consultation on it is so important, because that's where those ideas will come from.
Yes. And actually, you touched on lots of the themes that were in that CPF consultation. And I want to come back to a variety of those. But it also showed the framework of the various different routes that young people can choose. And so I'd love to start by asking you how you feel apprenticeships sat within that spectrum, within that range of choices for young people.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to, I suppose, to people don't often realise is actually some of the biggest providers of apprenticeships are universities.
Yeah.
Lots of universities like Manchester Metropolitan University is a really good example who really embraced this kind of agenda and an amazing university that really led the way on apprenticeships. And colleges do the same and things like that, and vice versa.
So young people still went to university in order. So in fact, there was very little cultural difference between.
Exactly, but we also saw the reverse. We saw apprenticeship providers like companies like Dyson, really good example of this. Who got degree awarding powers. Right, so they were doing apprenticeships that actually was, and it was a degree apprenticeship. And so what's really exciting in that actually is trying to take the best of both worlds. Because we're so lucky in this country that we have some of the world's best universities. And we're only second to the United States in world-class universities, and no country really comes close to us. And it's something that we should be really proud of, and we've invested in a lot. And it not just helps young people, but it's all about our research and development and our impact. So we should be really proud of our universities. So this is never and should never actually be about being anti-university, right? It should just be about, if you are a young person or an adult, you need the right choice for you, and you should be able to look at going to a college part-time if that's right for you. You should go to an apprenticeship for 2 or 3 years at degree level if that's right for you. So back to your question of where do they fit into the system, my view is that it's not a good policy debate if we pit them against each other. It's actually about saying, let's get the best of university and let's boost apprenticeships. Because the reason that's important is not only because it should be the individual that chooses the right option for them, and government shouldn't really be telling them which one's the best route for them. It's because our economy needs it. We have an economy that's incredibly high skill, where like pharmaceuticals, technology, professional services, those are the industries in Britain that are really, fizzing with growth and innovation. And they need high-skilled people. So this idea that, the majority of people will leave at 16 and go into work, that's gone. Employers want really high-level skills. Sometimes that's technical, sometimes it's university, sometimes it's wherever it might be. But our economy needs more and more higher skills. And therefore, it's not about university versus apprenticeships. No. It's about, we need more of both.
And there are some other choices as well, aren't there? So from 16, you can also choose to do a BTEC. What are the technical qualifications that you can do alongside?
Yeah, and this is a really interesting debate, actually. And this is where, we did a lot in government on this issue. And actually, Labour are thinking about doing quite a lot in this as well. So it's a really good, good debate for CPF to have, because to stereotype for a moment, if you are a young person, it's incredibly easy and straightforward to do GCSEs, A-level, and university. Right? It's simple, straightforward. Parents probably understand it. Your friends probably understand it. The system's set up like that. It's very well known. You've got tuition fees and maintenance support. The whole system is kind of set up to make that an easy, quick option that's low risk and safe. And you know you're going to get a degree out of it and things like that. The problem is that actually at 16 years old, there's this whole confusing, fragmented market out there, right? There's not just BTECs, there's applied general, there's NBQs, HNDs. There's this whole thousands and thousands of different qualifications. And therefore, if you are a young person making a really important decision that will genuinely shape your life, right? Or shape the direction you go into. And what you come up against is this thousands of different qualifications. You go for the safe option, or you go for the option that your parents did, or that your friends are doing, or that you've heard of, or that your teacher recommends. And that's why it defaults to A-levels. So what did we do in government, right, that improved that situation, is that we introduced T-levels. And the idea of T-levels is having, again, a simple qualification that sounds like an A-level, but it's technical and leads you into a profession. So you'll have a T-level in healthcare, a T-level in, engineering, a T-level in whatever it might be. So it's very much this qualification leads to a profession, rather than obviously an A-level, which is a subject, history, geography, economics, or whatever it might be, although they'll still have elements of vocation in there. And the T-levels element, right, was an attempt to try and simplify the system and things like that. But, and we rolled that out, and I think we're in the 3rd or 4th cohort of T-level students. So it's been going 4 years or so now. And so it's still quite early days and still being rolled out. And it takes a long time for a new qualification to bed in. I mean, A-levels were brought in the 60s, and they've been reformed and stuff like that, but they've been there. And therefore, T levels are quite early. They're simplifying. They're designed by employers with universities, and they're a real genuine option. But BTEC still exist, MBQs, H&Ds, all those ones, they're still out there.
Yeah.
And so it can still be quite confusing. And this is where the government has brought in the idea of V levels.
Right.
I know. And so the government is, the current government is this idea of V levels that are kind of a halfway house.
Yeah.
Between you can take a couple of A levels and a couple of E levels, and mix and match a bit of vocational, a bit of academic.
Okay, but that sounds good, because then you can still have the whole experience of going to university, but also end up with a technical skill.
Exactly. So, it could be a good thing. The thing I worry about is that it could just crowd out T levels and actually make things more complicated, and things like that. And what's the overlap and whatever. So, in short, there's a real big debate still.
Yes.
At 16 years old, of if you are a young person, how do you make it simple? How do you make it straightforward? How do you make it that you don't have to have, pay for support and advice from like a tutor or something like that to help you get through this? How do you, that the kid that, doesn't have parents that are engaged or supporting them and explaining to that kind of kid, how do we make sure that the system still is easy to navigate for them? And that you don't have to have super engaged parents and teachers and great advice and stuff like that in order to navigate it.
Because the whole inclusion agenda is very important here. And we're also, obviously concerned about social mobility. And is the apprenticeship a really good route for including all sorts of backgrounds?
It should be.
Social mobility.
It should be. And I'm careful with the words I use. It should be. And historically, they were. And a lot of people still assume they are. But there's actually a lot of evidence now coming out that they aren't the engines of social mobility that a lot of people assume. And there was some research by the Sutton Trust. It was last year or maybe the year before, but they do it quite regularly. That basically found that if you want to go and do a kind of degree apprenticeship at Rolls-Royce or BAE or something like that, so a prestigious thing, it's actually harder to get into than Oxbridge.
Yeah. Really?
Indeed. And that it's not, it's not a kind of engine of social justice that we want education and apprenticeships to be. And why is that? Because it feels counterintuitive, right? And the reason for that is that almost their apprenticeships become a victim of their own success. Is that cultural improvement that I spoke about, that young people really want them, they're prestigious, they lead to amazing careers. It means they're a victim of their own success because people want to do them. So when a company puts out an apprenticeship vacancy, they get thousands of applicants, which is amazing. It's a really good thing. But the problem there is that if demand is that high and there are so few apprenticeships, they become really scarce. And if you do have family connections, you've had a tutor, you've had extracurriculars, you've had all of the advantages and things like that, and you've got parents that have been really supportive, then you're more likely to get into that really prestigious apprenticeship. It's just natural. It's just how things work. And therefore that they've been almost a victim of their success. And it's why I was so proud of integrating apprenticeships into UCAS and the work that UCAS did to do it, because that was all about trying to balance the scales. Because if you do have a fair application process, which is what UCAS is brilliant at doing, being a fair, open playing field, you can apply to whatever and in a fair way, you can maybe address some of this. But what it doesn't address is the fundamental problem, which is there are too few apprenticeships. Right. Demand is what I described earlier, 400, 500,000 people, just going through UCAS, more that aren't going through UCAS will demand it. The number of apprenticeship vacancies is, vanishingly small. I always remember on results day at UCAS, we would have 4, 5, 6,000 live apprenticeship vacancies on that day. And yet there'd be hundreds of thousands of people that would consider doing it. So really the policy dilemma there, to bring it back to kind of this debate, is how does the government and how do we as people interested in boosting apprenticeships and giving people that right start in life, how do we get more apprenticeships out there and employers to deliver high numbers and all over the country? That's the real problem. And I've got my personal views, but it's an open question.
What is the answer to that? But I'm also wondering whether your background in understanding councils and local business needs actually also offers you a very interesting perspective on how you can tie together the needs of local business with the needs of local kids?
It's a really good question. And it's, there's no criticism of businesses, right? You can interpret what I just said as well, businesses should just be doing more. And I don't mean that at all, actually. The problem tends to be that employers are, they're meeting payroll. They're trying to meet their customers, keep their products up to date. They've got so many competing demands on their time about keeping their business going, and not helped by the fact that this government's taxing them more and more and more than ever, right? So Rachel Reeves' taxes are not helping the situation, and they're making it worse and worse to people to take on apprentices and take on young people. So, in that context, you can't blame businesses for, holding back a bit and thinking really carefully about, can I take on an apprentice? Can I afford to do it? Can I support them? Because there's you've got to train them, you've got to offer support, and they're not going to be a massive value to the business straight away. They're an apprentice. They're learning the trade, so they're not going to contribute. So it's a big thing for especially a small business to take on an apprentice. So I don't blame businesses for struggling to take on them. It's, my mind is, how do you make it easier for them? And there are some reforms that I think, about making, taking on apprentice easier, getting rid of some of the bureaucracy and getting a bit more flexibility and things like that need to happen. But fundamentally, it's about, how do you get more money being spent on apprenticeships? And what we did, in government was, there was two kind of big interventions that I would point to, and there that, we implemented the apprenticeship levy.
Yes, I was going to ask if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, which is one of those things that, some businesses will kind of roll their eyes and go, "Oh, bloody apprenticeship levy." And
many people,
but it was
do
one
exactly
of those.
that.
But it was one of those such an important moments that doubled the amount of money being spent on apprenticeships, right, overnight. Whether you like it or not, and there are legitimate criticisms, and it's not perfect, but the apprenticeship levy doubled the amount of money being on apprenticeships as a result.
Well, that is quite a good result, isn't
Which is really, really good.
Yes, however cumbersome or...
Yeah, and it tends, the frustrations I found with employers is that some of them might be a bit put out by having to pay it, right? But their frustrations aren't with the levy. Their frustrations are with the apprenticeship system, which is a separate thing. The problem is that it doubled the amount being spent on apprenticeships, but then we stopped. And it stayed roughly the same, increases roughly with inflation, just as businesses grow, because the levy is 0.5% on payroll above 3 million. That's what the levy actually is on all employers. So if your payroll, as soon as your payroll goes over 3 million, you have to pay 0.5% of it in the levy. So it's just big business really that pays the levy. So it increases a little bit naturally as payrolls increase, but it's not increased massively. So it did double it, but then it slowed down, and therefore we're now in a position that, great, the system expanded, but we kind of lost steam a little bit in government. And it's because obviously the pandemic hit in only a few years after the levy came in. And so therefore it kind of lost steam, I think. And if I was going to be critical, it was like, we set off this amazing cultural revolution, drove up this apprenticeship revolution, and then slightly lost steam. And in the last couple of years, and therefore that opportunity to keep that transformation going. So my personal view is that the levy's there for good reason. It's to make sure that all employers, big businesses are funding apprenticeships to make sure that young people get that opportunity, but that it's not enough on its own. And my view, and I've been arguing this for quite a long time now, and I think government is coming around to it, whatever, is that the approach we take on research and development is that we have R&D tax credits. If you as a business invest in research and development, you pay less tax as a result. It's a recognition.
It encourages that investment.
Exactly. And so therefore my mind goes, if we take that approach with capital investment, we take that approach with R&D, that we incentivize business to invest, why don't we do that with skills? Why don't we have skills tax credits that if you spend all of your apprenticeship levy or you transfer it to your supply chain or whatever, you then invest more?
Flexible enough to be able to do that?
And this is one of the debates that comes in, is the apprenticeship levy too inflexible?
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, and it's because it can only be spent on apprenticeships, by definition it's inflexible. Right. So it's hard to argue that it's not. The problem with making it more flexible is that it's a fixed pot of money. So if you make it more flexible and allow it to be spent on other things, by definition, less money will be spent on apprenticeships.
Yes. I mean, the comment that I've heard is that, do you think businesses don't want to invest in their own people? Of course they do, but that the tick box system is so strict that it makes it difficult to address the areas of training that they want to actually
But
invest
there's nothing
in.
stopping them just spending their own money.
Yeah.
Right? Lots of businesses spend
probably
huge
will.
amounts. I think the last stats I saw, I think business invests roughly, I think it was a government survey, about £100 billion a year also in training and skills. And the apprenticeship levy is only 3 billion.
Yeah.
3 to 4 billion. Yeah. So it is a small amount of what businesses invest already and things like that. So the reason I made that point is that I worry that if you just say the apprenticeship levy can be spent on anything, you're just dramatically reducing the amount of money going on apprenticeships. And if you go back to the conversation we had just a moment ago, the problem is that there are too few apprenticeships.
Yes.
You're making that situation worse.
Yes, and that's a very good argument. That's a very strong argument.
Exactly. So that's why I worry about making the apprenticeship levy more flexible, because actually you end up just with a cake. You're cutting up in a different way. Yeah. You're not actually fundamentally changing anything or improving anything. Yeah. And we have to create a system that incentivizes business to invest their own money and as much of it as possible because it's the right thing for their business.
So can you talk a little bit about small and medium enterprises, SMEs? Because one of the comments is that it's not attracting enough of the SMEs, which is, of course, huge part of our economy.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the way the British economy is slightly different actually to a lot of economies around in other countries. Yeah. Is that I think it's 99% or so of British businesses are SMEs.
Yeah,
and a huge proportion of those are actually micro businesses as well. Yeah. So there is that issue, and you have to have a system that works with that. So small businesses, if your payroll is less than 3 million, and by definition you'd be an SME if your payroll is less than that, roughly give or take, you don't pay a levy at all, right? So you don't pay into it. It's only big businesses that pays a levy. And actually, if you're an SME and you want to take on an apprentice, a lot of the levy actually does fund that. And it's one of those bits that we're getting into quite detail around the regulation and stuff like that. And I spent 5 years on the regulator and the board of the regulator. So it's kind of in my mind and whatever. I don't want to overcomplicate it. But the way the levy's set up is that a huge chunk of it is actually used to pay for smaller businesses to take on apprentices.
So that criticism not really justified then?
Well, if the criticism is that there aren't enough apprenticeships, it's a very legitimate criticism. If the criticism is that the government programs are too complicated for SMEs to engage with, it's a legitimate criticism. If the criticism is that the levy itself is bad for small businesses, I would have difficulties with that because they don't pay the levy, and actually it's the levy subsidises them. Yeah. And their apprentices. It started off at 10%. It used to be that a small business would pay 10% of the cost of training. Philip Hammond then actually reduced that to 5% in about 2019 or so. And actually this new government actually reduced it to 0. So in a way, I always worry that they now pay 0 and they don't pay the levy because it kind of means that they don't have any skin in the game. So I do worry a little bit about that. But the fundamental issue, right, going back to it, is that the small businesses struggle to engage with this program because, my dad had a small business, right? A couple of people, and he was, in charge of it. He was everything from the HR director to the tea boy, right? And everything in between. That's just what a small business is like. And therefore, the idea of taking on an apprentice can be a really daunting thing. And therefore, if I was going to point to what the two most successful things the last government did on apprenticeships, it's levy and all of the changes around apprenticeships that made them prestigious and brought in more money. Yeah. But the second thing was the Kickstart program. And the Kickstart program, this was during the pandemic, and that was aimed at SMEs. And what that did is it gave SMEs about £2,000 or £3,000. The amount changed during it.
That's quite popular, that Kickstart.
Massively popular.
Yes, and suddenly lots of companies got on board. I mean, I think we even employed a few in the party, didn't we?
Yeah, and it was hugely successful. Yeah. And because what it did is that that daunting effort of taking on an apprentice for an SME, if you say we'll give you £3,000 to take on an apprentice, as a small businessman, you kind of go, right, well, that will help cover the HR costs. That will help cover some of the supervisory kind of
costs. It was
costs.
literally, how can we use it?
Yeah. and stuff like that. And therefore, it was a relatively small amount of money in government context.
Yeah.
But for an SME, that made the difference between taking on apprentices is too much and it will damage my business to, oh, actually, I can handle this.
Yeah.
And therefore, the fact that we allowed the Kickstart program to stop and kind of be forgotten. Yeah, we should have kept it going.
And now, of course, we're looking at 1 million NEETs, not in education, employment or training. And this is 1 in 4 people between 16 and 23. Yeah. It's an absolute crisis.
Yeah. It's a disgrace. And it's not just it's a disgrace for the country in the sense of it damages business, damages productivity, but it's a tragedy for the individual. If you at 16, 17, 18, 19, if you don't get into work and you find yourself on welfare, that scar is with you for the rest of your life. And if you're on welfare for 1, 2, 3 years at that age, your peers that go into work will be miles ahead of you.
And it has such large knock-on effects on
self-confidence,
social cohesion.
It's an absolute tragedy. And the fact that this government, that Labour, has hit business with the national insurance increases, with all of the attacks on business, and that NEETs have gone from, a historic low under the last government. NEET figures were always, kept low and employment was always high. So now, as you say, edging towards 1 million young people who are having their lives devastated. It makes you so angry, right?
And apprenticeships could be such a powerful way, as the Kickstart program was as well, of getting those youngsters.
If I was there and I was in government, what an amazing privilege to be, right? In the Department of Education or Work and Pensions, I'd be going, right, let's get more money into the apprenticeship levy. Let's get more, bring back Kickstart. Let's get these 1 million people into apprenticeships.
And also, let's get the hospitality sector sorted out. My family's in the hospitality sector, and it's absolute a crisis there too.
100%.
So I was also going to ask you, alongside the CPF consultation, there was, at around about the same time, there's a policy exchange consultation also on education and skills. And one of the big things that they pick out there is the pipeline, if you like, of skills and the disconnect between what business needs and what we're producing through educational routes. Would you like to comment on that sort of pipeline, the skills disconnect, and what apprenticeships could be doing there to solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tricky area, right? Because you've got to think about, it is not the sole responsibility of schools to make people work ready. And you shouldn't expect a young person at 16, 17, 18 to turn up to their first day a ready-made, fully productive worker. Any employer that thinks that is they're in for a bit of a shock. And I don't think any employers really do think that. Because in the context of a school or university or college, you can do lots of things, but until you're actually in the world of work, you can't build those workplace skills. No. That's where you learn them. Yeah. So I always hesitate a little bit about this idea that people leave education fully formed as workers, because I just don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's reasonable to do it. Yeah. But there are things that that can actually really improve it. And I always think one of the things that I think, with hindsight, that we maybe didn't put enough emphasis on in government was around work experience. That actually,
so the Labour Party, of course, announced something in this area, haven't they, recently?
Yeah, indeed. And it's because, things like, when we set up the National Citizen Service, I was under David Cameron, it was a very long time ago, and also work experience and things like that. For me, that's where you look and you can see how actually in a school setting, you can build some of those softer skills, the team building, the kind of creativity, the working together and things like that to solve problems. It is work experience and national citizen service and things like that really do it. And I think with hindsight, we maybe should have put a bit more emphasis on the importance of that.
And we've been reading in the last few days, haven't we, about the disappearance of the Saturday job. I mean, I expect you grew up with the Saturday job. I did as well.
Indeed. I used to work in a dog kennels. That was my side. I used to work in dog kennels. You can imagine what I was doing at dog kennels. It was not glamorous. It involved a bucket and a spade.
But it was so character building, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was also that I was, I may have been doing that and doing the less glamorous parts of running, doing dog kennels and stuff like that. But it was also I was meeting customers.
Yeah.
and seeing how the other people were operating. And I was working out what it was like to, charge people and do it with a smile, or deal with a complaint, or improve processes. And like, why do we do this? We could make this much more efficient. It's just standard stuff in the business, right? And so I do think that, we need to remember, and it's why when it comes to things like the minimum wage, and the living wage and things like that, that we could be very proud, I think, of our time in government, that we, increase, the minimum wage and living wage, and we tackle low pay in lots of places and things like that. But you do have to recognise...
Although with a caveat, because of course the recent minimum wage increase alongside the national insurance drop in the threshold has really severely hit particularly the hospitality sector.
There's a trade-off. There's a massive trade-off that if you just say, right, we're going to make sure people are paid more and more and more, and you sort of put your blinkers on and you just focus on that, you can convince yourself, why do we put the minimum wage to £50 an hour on that basis?
And then the problem is that they don't get hired at all.
They don't get a job at all. And therefore, it's not an argument against the minimum wage or anything like that, but it is an argument to realise that, if you do lower the thresholds, you do increase national insurance, you do increase the minimum wage, and you attack business like Labour are doing, that as a businessman and a businesswoman and, and companies and stuff like that, if you go, well, actually, I've got a choice between taking a young person on the weekend or potentially not being able to meet my payroll next month, you meet your payroll, right? And therefore, there's the danger of ever increasing a tax on business and taxes, that they end up just going, well, can't hire young people. And I certainly can't invest in their training and things like that. So, there's such a trade-off.
That's also a cue for a question about AI. How much do you think that AI has impacted the contraction of the job market, particularly for young people?
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of say, we have been through this as a world, as a globe, right? We've been through these changes numerous times, right? Computers, the digital revolution happened in like the 50s and 60s. And there were predictions at that time that computers would eliminate work, and they certainly didn't. They created a huge amount, but they did get rid of some jobs. And, you think about like typists, or you think about a bank clerk or whatever. Those jobs fundamentally changed, right, with computers and things like that. And then they fundamentally will change again. So I'm not one of those people that kind of goes, right, well, this technology will lead to disaster and will all be replaced and or whatever. And therefore, for young people, they shouldn't be scared of AI, but they should be worried about people with AI skills.
Yes.
If you, as a young person...
I didn't really mean that people should be scared or not of AI. I just meant, do you think it's having an impact, particularly on the job market for young people?
And that's what I mean by we shouldn't be worried. Young people shouldn't be worried about AI, but they should be worried about people with AI skills. If they don't have them, they will be left behind, and they will find that they'll really struggle to get a job. And therefore, that's what makes me an optimist. And that means that what we need to be doing is integrating AI and digital and these kind of skills. And lots of schools already do this, integrating it into the curriculum. And integrating into schools and things like that, which means, giving more support to teachers. They need to upskill as well. You can't just ask a teacher, go and teach AI. So government needs to make sure that happens and things like that. But it won't, I don't think, lead to a disaster or anything like that. But it will fundamentally change things. And I see in my own work, that there are lots of jobs and tasks that I now do, which I ask AI to do. And go back a year or two, I'd have asked a junior member of staff to have done those. And now I just do it through AI.
That's the question, really, I think, that I'm asking. Coming back now to apprenticeships versus university degrees, let's talk about university debt, because one of the big advantages about apprenticeships is the earn and learn. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of the Conservative investment in this area. And in terms of debt, we've just learned in the last few days that we had £15 billion worth of debt last year associated with student fees, and that students themselves paid down about £5 billion of that. And that means that the debt is actually growing year by year. Tell me, what do you think about apprenticeships in the context of offering young people a way to learn without the expenses of debt?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be a bit careful because there's a lot said about tuition fees and things like that. And you know, I would hate for young people to put off from university because they hear about words like debt and things like that. Because actually university, you know, it's a route to an amazing career. Universities are an amazing thing to go to, and they lead to amazing jobs and things like that. So I always worry a little bit about the discussion. We can accidentally, you know, especially young people when they're, you know, thinking about their options and they hear adults and people on the news and the media talking about student debt and how it's dreadful and stuff like that. And they could be put off from going to university when they shouldn't be. I really don't think they should be. And it's because, you know, if you take on a student loan, and your earnings fall below, I can't remember what it is. I think it's about 26,000 at the moment. It kind of increases. If your earnings fall beneath that, you pay zero. So it's not debt. It's not debt in the way that a mortgage or a credit card is at all, and things like that. So it's based on your ability to pay. It's actually it's a graduate tax, and that's where the system is set up. And you're right that those numbers about the 15 billion and 5 billion paid off, what that actually represents is the taxpayer picks up that bill, because, you know, after 30 years, your student loans are written off, and when they're written off, it's the taxpayer that funds that.
Yes, but it's such a large amount of money that the Treasury is rather concerned about.
But it funds the higher education system. It funds our world-class universities. And so
actually, let's talk about funding of universities. Does the apprenticeship programme have the scope, the potential to influence the funding of universities in the longer term?
Yeah, and that, you know, I kind of alluded to it earlier a little bit around how, you know, most universities have fully embraced apprenticeships. Most universities now deliver huge numbers of apprenticeships and things like that. And so for me, it's not a versus. University versus this. You know, our focus should be on rooting out low quality, and there are low quality degrees. There are degrees in universities that are low quality, that don't give people an earning premium, and government should come down on that really heavily. And the last government did, and things like that. So we should root out low quality in higher education. We should never allow it to build in apprenticeships either, because they're just as liable to, you know, low quality. They're open to that happening. So we're absolutely focused on quality and rooting it out and growing the number of opportunities, growing the number of apprenticeships, so that as a young person, as an adult, you've got those opportunities. You can choose the right one for you. I mean, you know, apprenticeships have now become quite an amazing thing for an adult to do. Because when you think about it, if you're, you know, you've gone on paternity or maternity leave, and you want to come back and change careers and things like that, actually, an apprenticeship is a really good route, because you can carry on earning while also picking up new skills.
In fact, it was in our manifesto in 2024, returnerships, also a topic very close to my heart.
So if you as an adult want to retrain, if I wanted to retrain tomorrow, I couldn't just stop earning money for 2 or 3 years. No one can do that, right? Unless you're already very wealthy. But yeah, I couldn't do that. The only real route for me to do it would either be a part-time degree, which is, you know, very expensive, or through an apprenticeship. So I think, you know, the big change again is that apprenticeships are not just for young people. They are also for adults. But again, that means that we need more of them. And that's what it all comes back to, is how do we get more apprenticeships?
So just a couple more questions really about how you measure what success looks like, about the metrics. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's always, it has to be a mixture of metrics. You know, if you just say it's on what people earn as the only metric of success, right? You know, you have to think about some amazingly valuable careers like nursing or something like that that don't earn high amounts. And therefore, if your metric of success is earning potential, that leads you to a weird place where you think becoming a nurse is a bad thing. And I don't think anyone thinks that. So it's not just about, does an apprenticeship or university lead to big earnings, although there should be a return on investment and things like that. It also has to be, do you get into a graduate role? Right, a proper professional graduate role. Do you end up with a job that actually needs a degree or needs an apprenticeship, right? Or would you have actually been much better off not going at all and just getting that job, and you could have got that job without any kind of qualification? So the metrics for me of success has to be about, you know, does it affect and improve your earnings ability, with a couple of caveats about really important careers that don't earn really high. does it open up career paths and jobs and professions that it wouldn't have otherwise done? But also there has to be an element of social justice around here, that we need to make sure that, regardless of your background, that actually you get to go to university, that you get access to a degree apprenticeship, that you can go to this, and that we don't have a system that just gives greater advantage to people that already have a huge amount of advantage, right? We need to get a system that gives you a great career, whatever your background might be.
Yeah. And so just sort of looking forward, is there any way in which you would like to see the apprenticeship program reformed, improved, go to the next level, more of them? I heard you say that a few times.
Yeah, I'm going to end up repeating myself a little bit here, but the fundamental thing that we have to do, and it's why it was so exciting to see in Kemi's party conference speech, actually, the commitment to doubling the amount of investment in apprenticeships from 3 to 6 billion. And that was really exciting to see her really apprenticeships. It was really, for somebody who's such an advocate for it, it was so exciting to see her really embrace it and talk about it and make it a big priority for our party.
It is a big priority for our party.
Yeah, it always is. But hearing it echoed back in the leaders' party conference,
I think it's really one of our big successes and a great way forward.
But there are so many things that she could have spoken about in that speech, and it's a small amount of time. And the fact that she chose to talk about apprenticeships was just, for someone like me, was just really exciting to see.
And that's why we've got the renewal logo here.
On brand as always. I expect nothing less from you. But the fact that she made that commitment, for me, that is what it's about. It's about getting more money on apprenticeships, growing the numbers. And that's not about taxing business more. I don't think anyone's suggesting that. It's about, getting tax incentives so businesses, through their own volition, invest in this, and they can make the payroll still, but also invest in training. And that's what's really exciting. And to answer your question, that's where our priority as a party has to be.
And so rewarding for you, John, because you actually integrated the UCAS choice with apprenticeships, and I think that's a huge pathway for young people to really sort of understand that both routes are, a good way forward. I'm just wondering whether you've got any little heartwarming stories for us to finish on. Somebody that that went down the apprenticeship route and has been very successful for them.
It's a really good question. I mean, it's really hard to pick out with a single individual. But I remember when I was at UCAS. That every year on results day, we'd go down into the contact center and pick and man the phones. Obviously, results day is such a stressful kind of opportunity. I still remember phone calls, where people would phone up and they'd raise apprenticeships of their own, just organically. They'd just raise, what about apprenticeships? Is that something I should be looking at on my UCAS account, stuff like that? And hearing young people think, I need to weigh up. Is college right? Is it university? Is it apprenticeship? For me, when hearing that was just so exciting, or whatever, because it is something that if you were to rewind 15 years ago, it would never have happened. It would never happen. So when I was doing those contact centers and listening to young people on a very stressful day for them, and things like trying to support them, hearing them talk about apprenticeships with equal parity, it made me just think the government has really achieved something here, really exciting and amazing. We can always get a bit lost, I think, in big numbers and policy and government and departments and regulation and all the detail and stuff like that. But to just hear a young person talk about apprenticeships and ask for information on the results day, amazing.
Fantastic. And looking forward to the future, zooming out a bit, can you imagine what the impact might be of apprenticeships on culture, on the intergenerational gap that people have been talking about a lot? Can you see how it might impact the culture of society in a very positive way? What benefits do you think looking forward to the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I suppose, two things. The first one is just, given that we have such a high skill economy, by boosting apprenticeships, you're opening up that opportunity to get a high skilled job to so many more people. For people that university isn't the right choice and college isn't the right choice, and therefore, it really improves that fairness between the generations as you talk. Regardless of your background, whatever your aspirations are, there are multiple routes to a great career, really high skilled career, and it's for you to choose the right one for you. So that's I think the next step. The second point of this, right, is that I think the next stage is about actually universities learning from apprenticeships, and actually apprenticeships learning from universities. Is because actually they both have amazing things. Universities do really rigorous academic work that's at really high level, that's really, so important, and whatever releases some of the most innovative kind of research and development. You look at that Oxford Cambridge arc, across Britain. It's some of the most innovative businesses in the world are based there, right? It's our own kind of little Silicon Valley. And it's therefore universities are feeding the people into it, right? But what they can learn from apprenticeships, and those universities are doing that now, is integrating work experience, doing sandwich courses, that work placements are part of a degree. So they're therefore universities learning from apprenticeships. And the flip's there that, we need to make sure that the apprenticeships also come with the most rigorous, the most cutting edge learning and academic rigor just as much, and things like that. So that's the second point, is that both learning from each other and getting the best from each other means that almost whatever choice you make as a young person, will get a great career with real world life experience.
Well, John, I really enjoyed your positive and informative aspect on apprenticeships, and just how much that's going to change the future of education and transform the opportunities for young people. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, John. And thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much for what all of the Conservative Policy Forum does, right? We are only going to get back into government if ideas come from the grassroots. So thank you so much for making sure that members get to input to all of these debates.
Yeah, well, we're really looking forward to having more people share their views on CPF, and really just taking that debate about policy going forward for the next general election, for renewal, and just ensuring that everybody gets a chance to have their say. And thank you for all your expertise and wisdom on the subject of apprenticeships. Thank you.